Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. The war in Ukraine will not end in a hurry. By the looks of it, it may spill beyond Ukraine. Russia has been making nuclear threats. Now NATO is moving into an aggressive posture. The US is expanding its military presence in Europe. Its allies are deploying more troops and resources. They're covering Europe's eastern flank. Russia sees it as a provocation and it promises to match it. The result is this: more troops, more weapons and more tensions in Europe. This has clearly gone beyond Ukraine. NATO is also moving into Asia. They've defined China as a challenge, not immediate, but a worry nonetheless, and Beijing does not like the sound of it. Japan is making moves. Other Asian powers that joined this NATO summit in Madrid have also sent out a message to Beijing. This is not a North Atlantic military alliance anymore. It has obviously entered the Indo-Pacific. What do these developments mean? Are we looking at a bigger military clash in Europe? What is NATO's threat perception? On Gravitas tonight, we'll discuss that and more. The 20-year-long war in Afghanistan, that was the last major assignment for US troops. It ended in chaos, confusion and the collapse of a country. Now the mighty American military has a new mission: protecting Europe. That's right, Europe could become the next battleground. It already is with Ukraine, but the war in Ukraine has proved to be a security nightmare for the EU. It has no option but to prepare for a wider conflict. America agrees with this assessment, so it will ramp up US forces in Europe. The UK and Germany say they will contribute too. The result is this: a massive build-up on NATO's eastern flank. Why now, you may ask? Is Europe afraid that Russia will attack beyond Ukraine? What is their threat assessment? In the next 4 minutes, we'll discuss. First, let's listen to Joe Biden. This is the US president announcing fresh American deployments in Europe.
We've reaffirmed that our Article 5 commitment is sacred, and an attack on one is an attack on all, and we will defend every inch of NATO territory. Every inch of NATO territory.
Together, our allies, we're going to make sure that NATO is ready to meet threats from all directions across every domain: land, air, and the sea. In a moment when Putin has shattered peace in Europe and attacked the very tenets of rule-based order, the United States and our allies, we're going to step up. We're stepping up. We're proving that NATO is more needed now than it ever has been, and it's as important as it ever has been.
This was Biden's assessment. He said this during the NATO summit in Madrid yesterday. Today was the final day of that summit. America has made two clear conclusions. Number one, Putin cannot be trusted. And number two, America's allies feel threatened. And that gives Joe Biden a reason to mobilize his military. So where will American troops be deployed? Let's give you a breakdown. A brigade will be stationed in Romania. 2,000 American troops will be deployed here. Plus 3,000 soldiers will be stationed in Romania on a rotational basis. So that means a total deployment of 5,000 troops. Next is the United Kingdom. It will host 2 squadrons of American F-35 fighters. The third location is Spain. 2 American Navy destroyers will be moved there. Remember, Spain already has 4 American destroyers, so now it will have a total of 6. America is deploying air defense systems too. They will be sent to Italy and Germany. But their biggest move will be in Poland. Here, the US is planning a permanent military headquarters. The 5th Army Corps of the US military will be stationed in Poland. This is a combat force. And here's something you should know. The US already has over 100,000 troops in Europe. Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, they had 80,000 troops in Europe. When Russia attacked, the US sent another 20,000, so a total of 100,000. Now it will add more. The United Kingdom and Germany are also committing more resources. The UK will send an extra 1,000 troops to Estonia. They already have 2,000 soldiers there. London will also keep warplanes and an aircraft carrier on standby. What about Germany? Reports say the Germans will commit a brigade-sized force to Lithuania. So NATO is now effectively moving into an aggressive posture. What does it look like? Let me show you. On your screen is NATO's eastern flank. You can call this the front line for NATO. This is what Europe needs to defend if there is a war with Russia. The focus is on 8 countries: Estonia, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, and Bulgaria. NATO now has a strong presence across this region. How many troops are we talking about? At least 324,000 soldiers, 324,000. These are soldiers of the host country and allied nations, meaning these are NATO forces, plus their air defense equipment. So NATO now has some serious firepower on its eastern flank. This is a very big shift. A few months back, NATO was facing an existential crisis. French President Emmanuel Macron had called this alliance brain dead. That's the term he used. NATO lacked an identity, it lacked a purpose. Some years back, even Vladimir Putin was keen on NATO membership. That should tell you something as to how far they've come. Back then, Putin said, Russia is a part of European culture. And look at how things have shaped up now. The same Putin is NATO's enemy number 1, the man who has single-handedly galvanized it. So NATO is expanding, getting more members and deploying more troops. How do you think Putin responded? He said this shows their imperial ambitions.
It is a means to protect their own interests, that is, with the hands of Ukrainians and the Ukrainian people. NATO members and leading NATO countries simply want to assert themselves, further assert their role in the world, confirm the leadership of their hegemony in the trust sense of the word, their imperial ambitions.
Putin had a message for Sweden and Finland too. Their entry into NATO is now just a matter of time. Putin said he has no problems with NATO's expansion, but if they deploy infrastructure in Finland and Sweden, he would respond differently. That's what he said. He has vowed to match NATO's deployments.
As for Sweden and Finland, we do not have such problems with them that we have with Ukraine. Unfortunately, we have no territorial issues or disputes. We have nothing to worry about in terms of membership of Finland and Sweden in NATO. Well, they want it, please. They only must clearly understand that there were no threats to them before. Now, if military contingents and infrastructure are deployed there, we will have to respond in a mirror manner.
What would a Russian mirror deployment mean? More missiles, more warships, even nuclear weapons. Russia may have made the NATO stronger, but Putin will not shy away from sending a message. This conflict is only intensifying. Now, Europe is familiar territory for NATO. They fought the Cold War there. They know the place inside out. But Europe won't be the battleground for much longer. The real battle is unfolding to the east now, in Asia. And the adversary is much stronger. It's the People's Republic of China. Their army, their economy, their population, all of it is much bigger than Russia. Also, the ideological divisions are sharper. Russia at least pretends to be a democracy. Their economy also follows the free market. Not the case in China. China is a textbook authoritarian communist regime. They have the will and the power to topple the world order. The question is, what can NATO do about it? On paper, well, nothing. NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. They deal with transatlantic tensions. China is in the other side of the world. It's an Indo-Pacific country. So until now, NATO was reluctant to take on China. They were happy in Europe. But this week in Madrid, that changed. The NATO has openly named China as a threat to their security. Listen to the joint statement. This is what they've said. We face systemic competition from those, including the People's Republic of China, who challenge our interests, security, and values, and seek to undermine the rules-based international order. They're talking about three things: interests, security, values. All three belong to Cold War terminology. And it's not just the words. NATO's actions indicate an Asian pivot. 4 Indo-Pacific nations were invited to the Madrid summit: Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. And this has never happened before. 4 Indo-Pacific countries attending a NATO summit. This was a first. All 4 of them spoke about the China challenge. Listen into South Korea's president, Yoon Suk-yeol.
The security situation of a certain region can send ripple effects throughout the world. So there is a shared understanding that alliances based on certain regions are not enough to address security crises. That recognition has been expanded because of the crisis in Ukraine. That recognition is also why South Korea, Australia, Japan and New Zealand have been invited to the meetings as the Asia-Pacific 4, as close cooperation between the Indo-Pacific and NATO have become more crucial in these times.
What will that cooperation look like? Well, the White House has identified a few areas: cyber and hybrid threats, maritime security, counter-terrorism, climate change. These are the 4 cornerstones of cooperation, and one of them will especially annoy China. That is maritime security. Because it could mean a lot of things: joint naval drills, joint patrols, moves that counter China's influence in the Indo-Pacific. Beijing will not like that. Among these Asian partners, Japan is the most eager. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida wants to upgrade the partnership with NATO. What does that mean? A, more cooperation. He's talking about changing Japan's partnership document with NATO. And B, bolstering Japan's defenses. You see, right now they spend only 1% of their GDP on defense. Ideally, Japan would like to be somewhere around 2%, which is on par with NATO standards. Now imagine you're a foreign policy mandarin sitting in Beijing. You're tracking the Madrid summit. All the statements, all the speeches, what are your big takeaways? Number 1, China has been named in NATO's roadmap document for the first time. And number 2, 4 Indo-Pacific countries attended the summit, and all 4 are China's regional rivals. It's basically blinking red lights for Beijing. Their foreign ministry was quick to condemn NATO's statement. They said it wrongly defines China. Listen to this.
NATO's so-called new strategy concept document disregards the facts, gives a false account of the true facts, wrongly defines China as posing a strategic challenge, and smears China's foreign policy. It opposes China's normal military development and national defense policy, is irresponsible, encourages conflict, and is full of Cold War thinking and ideological prejudice. China is seriously concerned and firmly opposed to this.
Chinese state media has gone a step ahead. Let me tell you what the Global Times says in an op-ed. Catering to NATO's Asia Pacification is tantamount to inviting wolves into the house. They don't say Indo-Pacific, they say Asia Pacific. It's an extremely unwise choice for any Asia Pacific country and is bound to damage that country's strategic trust with China, inevitably leading to consequences. What consequences are they talking about? Military or economic? That's a big worry for NATO's Asian partners. China has a history of offensive deterrence, meaning when they feel threatened, they lash out with force. Offensive deterrence. They mount military incursions. I can give you multiple examples. Their entry into the Korean War in 1950, their attack on India in 1962, the war on Vietnam in 1979, all of these followed the same principle: offensive deterrence. Could China do something similar now? Sort of like a preemptive action to discourage NATO? It is certainly possible. But a lot depends on how quickly NATO completes this Asia pivot. The alliance chief, Jens Stoltenberg, says China is a challenge but not an adversary.
China is substantially building up its military forces, including nuclear weapons, bullying its neighbors and threatening Taiwan. investing heavily in critical infrastructure, including in allied countries, monitoring and controlling its own citizens through advanced technology, and spreading Russian lies and disinformation. China is not our adversary, but we must be clear-eyed about the serious challenges it represents.
So a threat for the future. That's how NATO sees China. They want to deal with Russia first and then turn to the Indo-Pacific. If NATO does build an alliance in Asia, it would have far-reaching consequences. But what will that alliance look like? An Asian copy of the NATO? Or a new template suited to Asia's cultural and political differences? A lot of countries, including India, will be watching for that. But looking at NATO's track record, I would not hold my breath. We are talking about the most brutal war machine in the world. Their power is overshadowed by just one thing: their hypocrisy. Let me tell you what the NATO founding charter says. And listen to this closely. This is the NATO founding charter. The parties to this treaty are determined to safeguard the freedom, common heritage, and civilization of their peoples, founded on the principles of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law, except when it suits their political interests. In that case, the treaty goes out of the window. The best example, this whole Nordic expansion. The West was so eager to admit Sweden and Finland into NATO, they just had to find a way around Turkiye. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was blocking both memberships. So what does NATO do? Abandon their founding treaty. They sacrificed principles for policy and politics. Let me tell you how. Around 100,000 Kurds live in Sweden, plus 16,000 in Finland. Most of them are fleeing persecution in West Asia, in countries like Turkiye, Iran and Iraq. Europe was supposed to be a safe haven for them, a place to restart their lives, but not anymore. This week, Finland and Sweden struck a deal with Turkiye. Erdogan lifted his objection to NATO's expansion. In return, he got some concessions. And I've got that document with me. It's one of the most loosely worded agreements in history. Listen to what it says. As prospective NATO allies, Finland and Sweden extend their full support to Turkey against threats to its national security. But who decides that criteria, national security? Sweden has a number of Kurdish lawmakers in their parliament. Do they constitute a national security threat now? Or maybe the hundreds of Kurdish kebab vendors. Are they a threat too? That's problem number one. Now listen to problem number two. Finland and Sweden, this is what they say, Finland and Sweden will address Turkey's pending deportation or extradition requests of terror suspects expeditiously and thoroughly. Again, loosely worded, Turkey is already piling the pressure on Sweden and Finland. It wants to extradite 33 suspects. 17 members of the Kurdistan Workers' Party or the PKK and 16 supporters of Fethullah Gulen. Gulen is a Turkish preacher. Erdogan accuses him of plotting the 2016 coup. Now here's the problem. Europe already considers the PKK to be a terrorist group, but not the Gulen movement or the YPG, which is fighting the Islamic State in Syria. Finland and Sweden are hosting these dissidents. They promised them a new life, but now that promise has been abandoned for politics. Listen to this Kurdish politician in Sweden describe the situation.
By myself, a refugee, and I thought that here was the haven for us. But now, it was 10 days ago, I didn't feel that actually that was the haven I came to, because other power, dictatorship powers outside, they have demand. They climb on our, democracy. That is hard to understand.
And all of this for what? To humiliate Vladimir Putin, to irritate Russia even more in the middle of a war. What happened to all the claims of human rights? All the promises of equality? Let me show you a report from February 2022. The European Human Rights Court had pulled up Turkey. They accused Erdogan of targeting Kurdish lawmakers. A number of them were put in prison. The court said legal rights were violated by Erdogan's government. And what does Europe do? Surrender to his demands 4 months later. And why just Europe? The United States did the very same thing. After the deal was struck, US officials said they made no concessions, that they offered nothing to sweeten the deal. But look at today's headline. Biden administration throws support behind potential F-16 sale to Turkiye. Interesting timing, wouldn't you say? Turkey lifted its objection on Tuesday. Biden agrees to sell the F-16 jets on Wednesday, yet the US claims no concessions were made. And just to be clear, Erdogan requested these jets back in October 2021. It's been 9 months. So for 9 months, Joe Biden sat on the proposal, but this week he agrees. That's too good to be a coincidence. The fact is, both the US and Europe sold their so-called ideals. Not just this week, but throughout this war. Turkey kept violating Western sanctions on Russia. They welcomed Russian oligarchs. They welcomed Russian investments. But the West said nothing. Compare that to how they treated countries like India. Lectures for buying Russian oil, which, by the way, is not a sanctioned commodity. So the next time Europe talks about human rights, point to the Kurds of Sweden and Finland. They were promised a new life. Instead, they're getting a painful reminder of their old one. And talking about broken promises, China made a promise to Hong Kong. It was called One Country, Two Systems. But Communist Party loyalists have now taken over Hong Kong. For the first time in almost 900 days, Xi Jinping stepped out of the mainland. The Chinese president is in Hong Kong. The occasion, the 25th anniversary of the handover of Hong Kong. This city, you would know, used to be part of British territory from the colonial times. 25 years back on this day, Hong Kong was returned to China. Today's events leave no doubt as to who controls Hong Kong. The town was painted red. There were Chinese flags everywhere, and there was Xi Jinping. The Chinese president declared, "Today Hong Kong has been reborn."
In the past few years, Hong Kong has withstood severe tests again and again, overcoming risks and challenges one by one. After the wind and rain, Hong Kong has risen from the ashes and also demonstrated a high level of vigor and vitality.
This visit is like a victory lap for Xi. 2 years ago, he imposed a sweeping national security law on Hong Kong. It crushed the anti-government protests, silenced all critics, muzzled the civil society, and overhauled Hong Kong's electoral system. Nearly all of the city's pro-democracy figures are either in jail or exile. There is no political opposition. Hong Kong is now under complete control of Beijing. But there's one thing that's still not under Beijing's control, and that is the Wuhan virus. On the stage, Xi Jinping was maskless. That's because he's in a bubble. An elaborate closed loop was created to welcome the Chinese president in Hong Kong. Before his visit, thousands of government officials, foreign dignitaries, and a select group of journalists were put in quarantine. They were confined to a hotel for at least a week. They were given a Wuhan virus test every day. Xi Jinping was supposed to visit a neighborhood in Hong Kong. Office workers there were also quarantined. They were forced to stay at home. What about the children who welcomed him? Well, they too were quarantined. The Chinese president looks pleased with the arrangements. He said that his heart is with Hong Kong.
It has been 5 years since I last visited Hong Kong. During these 5 years, I have been following developments in Hong Kong, thinking about Hong Kong. My heart and the central government's heart are with the Hong Kong people.
Well, his heart may be in Hong Kong, but the rest of him will not be. He won't spend the night here. He's traveling back to Shenzhen on a train, and he'll come back to Hong Kong for tomorrow's events. Bizarre, isn't it? Why won't he stay in the city? Because Hong Kong went through the world's worst Wuhan virus outbreak this year. Official data claims new infections have declined. Then why is Xi Jinping spending the night in Shenzhen? Does he not feel safe in Hong Kong, even with a closed loop? Perhaps he would feel safer tomorrow, because tomorrow a new leader will take charge in Hong Kong. His name is John Lee. Xi Jinping is expected to attend his swearing-in. Now, John Lee is a hardliner, someone who has been handpicked by Beijing to replace Carrie Lam. Lee has a background in law enforcement. He was the security chief of Hong Kong. The US has sanctioned him for undermining Hong Kong's autonomy. The European Union has condemned his appointment. Why such opposition for Lee? Because he's a Communist Party loyalist. Recently, he backed a controversial extradition bill. A bill that would have paved the way for the extradition of wanted fugitives to mainland China. There was a massive backlash. The bill had to be withdrawn. With Lee's appointment to the top job, this bill could be brought back along with other pro-Beijing proposals. One of the proposals by Lee is a law against fake news. If passed, it could muzzle more anti-government voices. Needless to say, Xi Jinping would welcome these moves. He's expected to speak again tomorrow, and we will keep track. You know, the thing with dictators is that they live in denial. They like to believe that their regime is prosperous, that their policies are promising, that their subjects are perfectly happy. One such dictator ruled the Philippines for 2 long decades. His name is Ferdinand Marcos. Earlier today, his son and namesake took the oath of office as the president of the Philippines. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. He made global headlines and wasted no time in telling the world that he represents the biggest electoral mandate in the history of the Philippine democracy. The press wasted no time in reminding the world about his father. Most headlines read, "Philippines' new president is a dictator's son." But can you blame them? For many, the name of Ferdinand Marcos means brutality and abuse. Marcos Sr. was a notorious man. He imposed the martial law. He maintained absolute control over the media and the courts. Under him, dissidents were tortured. Political opponents were murdered. Ferdinand Marcos was booted out of the Philippines, overthrown by a people's revolt. That was in the year 1986. Marcos Jr., or Bong Bong as he's called, began his political career while his father was still in office. Now, Bong Bong is British educated. He went to Oxford. In 1981, he was elected vice governor of a province called Ilocos Norte. Within 2 years, he became governor, congressman, and then senator. In 2016, he ran for vice president, but he lost. He's now 64 years old. Earlier today, he placed his hand on the Bible and took oath of office as the 17th president of the Philippines. With him was his wife and 3 sons.
Si Ferdinand, Romuald at Wikain ang aking mga tungkulin.
Ang aking talaga, ang aking sarili. Natutuparin ko na buong katapatan at sigasig
Ang aking mga tungkulin.
Ang aking mga tungkulin.
Bilang Pangulo ng Pilipinas.
Bilang Pangulo ng Pilipinas.
In his inauguration speech, Marcos Jr. paid a tribute to his father. He also met the outgoing president, Rodrigo Duterte. It will be his legacy that Marcos Jr. will be carrying forward. So what exactly is he inheriting? In the week leading up to his inauguration, the Philippines shut down an investigative news website. Why? Because it was critical of Duterte. The Duterte regime was headlined by its bloody war on drugs. Police were given free hand to shoot and kill anyone suspected of being involved in the drug trade. More than 6,200 people were killed in the last 6 years. The regime also crushed the illegal luxury car trade. It once bulldozed $6 million worth of Porsches, Bentleys and McLarens. To be fair, not all of Duterte's policies were bad. He did manage to lift millions of people out of poverty, also improve the country's infrastructure. But selective, as history often is, chances are Duterte will be remembered for his war on drugs, on the Catholic Church and on the opposition. Critics call Duterte a human rights calamity, someone whose regime was a dress rehearsal for what may lie ahead. Marcos Jr., they fear, will rule with an iron fist. But you see, it's easy to write off a leader even before he's ended his first day in office. Even easier to let historical biases color your judgment. Marcos Jr. has not kept his policies under wraps. He has promised to tame inflation, also halve the cost of rice, boost production and strengthen food security. In fact, he has appointed himself as the country's agriculture minister. The president has also promised to boost jobs. What about foreign policy? Duterte openly quoted China. He overlooked the Philippines' maritime row with Beijing. He also set aside the international ruling, the one that said China did not have historical claims over most of South China Sea. It came in 2016. Duterte put it aside. He cozied up to China because he wanted their money. At one point, he was ready to scrap a key military pact with the US if it came to that. Marcos Jr. says his government will elevate ties with China, but it will not compromise on sovereignty. Also, he'll be walking a quote-unquote very, very fine line. That's what he said. What about domestic affairs? What does Marcos Jr. mean for Manila? What does he bring to the table? For starters, experience. You see, this man has been in office almost continuously since the age of 23. He's prepared for presidency all his life. That aside, the Marcos Jr. regime is likely to be more of the same. He's likely to continue Duterte's policies. The two families are allies. In fact, Duterte's daughter Sara Duterte will be the new vice president of the country. So you won't see a radical change in Manila's policies. And that may not necessarily be a good thing. Our next story is about R. Kelly, a singer once known as the king of R&B, famous for breaking the charts globally. Today, he was convicted for sexual abuse, sentenced to 30 years in jail. For 30 years of predatory acts. Throughout his career, R. Kelly faced numerous allegations, accusations of exploiting teenagers, running sex cults, trafficking young girls, and child pornography. But his wealth and contacts shielded him from being charged. His conviction is just another reminder of how easy it is for predators with power to escape accountability for years, if not a lifetime.
He was once a chart-topping hit maker.
This is my story. Yeah, I'm from that Chi-Town dirt. I went from being broke to sleeping in Versace shirts.
The king of rhythm and blues with a cult following.
This is my story. And I'm sticking to it. 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 And I'm sticking to it.
Today, he is a convict by law, a predator who exploited his stardom.
Mr. Kelly, will you... I personally, this happened to me a long time ago. I was 17, I'm 45 today. I never thought that I would be here to see him be held accountable for the atrocious things that he did to children.
Very proud of my fellow survivors and very pleased with the outcome. 30 years did he do this, and 30 years is what he got.
This is the story of Robert Sylvester Kelly, known to the world as R. Kelly. 31 years ago, he was signed for his first major record label. Around the same time, he started sexually exploiting a 15-year-old girl.
On your right here, there you go.
Over the years, the list of his victims grew, the accusations multiplied, the crimes became more heinous. They even spilled into public view. But the singer's wealth, fame, and contacts masked the predator in him and shielded him from the consequences. 31 years on, there has finally been justice. R. Kelly has been convicted for his crimes. He has been sentenced to 30 years in prison on charges of sexual abuse and trafficking.
Today, R. Kelly was sentenced to prison for his many crimes against underage girls. And R. Kelly used the power of his celebrity and his music business to lure and to manipulate and to isolate and to denigrate many young girls.
The verdict did not come about easy. It took 3 decades, a cultural shift, a Me Too movement, and a TV documentary to hold this man accountable. The accusations first emerged in 1994. 27-year-old Kelly married 15-year-old Alia, an R&B phenomenon who met Kelly when she was 12. The two were illegally married in a secret ceremony. In 2002, Alia died in a plane crash. In 1996, a civil suit was filed by Tiffany Hawkins. She said that he forced her into sex when she was in high school. In 1998, the singer settled the lawsuit for $250,000. In 2001, he was sued by a former intern called Tracy Sampson. She accused him of treating her as a sex object. The case was settled out of court for an undisclosed sum. In 2002, a sex tape showed Kelly sexually abusing a 14-year-old girl. He was arrested but was released on a bail of $750,000. The victim refused to testify. And in 2017, he was accused of trapping 6 women in a sex cult. The allegations came from 3 of his former employees. It was this case that opened a can of worms. It ignited a Me Too movement against Kelly. A 2019 TV documentary put the final nail on the coffin. It offered the most comprehensive account of Kelly's gruesome crimes. 3 years later, the singer has been convicted. But why did it take so long? The answers are plenty. You see, most of R. Kelly's victims were black women. They say their skin color often led to prosecutors distrusting or dismissing their allegations. The second aspect to this story is power. R. Kelly was a linchpin in the music industry. Despite the accusations against him, millions of fans bought his music and attended his concerts. Hundreds of his aides and friends facilitated his pattern of abuse. Other artists and producers ignored his misdemeanor. And on some occasions, even the media covered for him. This case only illustrates how powerful people can evade consequences for years, sometimes even evade them their entire life. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Now to the big story from India, a horrific incident that happened in Udaipur this week. First, a recap. On Tuesday, a Hindu tailor was attacked by 2 Muslim men. They beheaded him. They recorded a video of the attack and released it on the internet. All of this happened in broad daylight. It was bone-chilling, to say the least, especially the video. The 2 attackers were waving their daggers around. They were laughing and boasting, even issuing threats to the Prime Minister of India. In that video, they explained their actions. They said it was a revenge attack, revenge for the insulting comments against Prophet Muhammad. The victim had supported those statements on social media. In response, they murdered him. It makes you wonder, what sort of a society are we living in? Yes, the comments were wrong. The comments can be wrong. Yes, sentiments can be hurt. But nothing justifies this sort of violence, this sort of barbaric communal hatred. But turns out, it wasn't just blind hate. There could be an international angle to this incident. A Pakistani hand could be at play. That's what the state police are saying. They have already arrested the 2 attackers, Ghaus-e Mohammed and Riaz Jabbar. According to the police, both men had links to Pakistan. Mohammed went to Karachi in 2014. He stayed there for close to 45 days. His mobile phone has revealed even more details. Several Pakistani and Arab numbers are saved on it. 10 of them were in constant contact with the accused. What business did this man have in Karachi? The police say he is linked to a Sunni extremist group called the Dawat-e-Islami. So the trip in 2014 could have been a training course. What about the second accused? We don't know if he traveled to Pakistan, but he too was in touch with the same group, which means this could be a wider conspiracy, a plan to destabilize India. In fact, Rajasthan's Home Minister gave a similar statement. He says the killing was aimed at triggering fear and riots. If so, the plan seems to have failed. There were some protests in the aftermath of the killing, but so far things are under control. Not back to normal, but under control. Major Muslim organizations have also spoken against this incident, like the Jamaat-e-Ulema Hind. They have called this attack un-Islamic. But where is the international community? Where is the United Nations? Usually they love speaking on developments in India. This week they did it again. An Indian fact-checker was arrested for his tweet from 2018. In his tweet, he allegedly disrespected Hindu gods. Let me tell you how the UN reacted to that arrest. Journalists should not be jailed for what they write, what they tweet, and what they say. And that goes for anywhere in the world, including this room. Well, that's a sweeping statement. Now compare this to the UN's reaction to the beheading, and I'm quoting again, "We call for the full respect of all religions and for ensuring throughout the world that different communities can live in harmony and peace." As vague as it gets, a sweeping statement with no regard for the nuances. Clearly, this attack was not just blind hatred. It wasn't just community versus community. This was days in the making. First, the Al-Qaeda threatened to attack Indian cities. The UN said nothing. Then the Islamic State attacked a Sikh temple in Kabul. This time the UN condemned it, but they said nothing about the India link, nothing about the revenge angle. And now this happens, a beheading in broad daylight. The fact is, we could see the radicalization in front of our eyes. The Muslim nations gave up their campaign, but extremists did not. They used it to mobilize and radicalize their followers. And what did the international community do? Absolutely nothing. They let this controversy fester, allowed terror groups to capitalize on it, and now they're lecturing India. Let's hope this horrific incident will jolt them into action, not just the United Nations, but also the Muslim countries of the world. So far, they've been silent. Not a single word of condemnation has come out. But now is the time for them to act. We're wrapping the show, leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.